Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn how Uber and Mad Canada are reducing impaired driving at uber.com/home soon.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw. There's a ton of stuff, a metric ton of stuff going on in BC politics right now. We're going to get into all of it, jam-packed show. Jeff is here, as always. Ali is here, as always. Jillian is still off, and we are joined by repeated special guest over the years, Adam Olson, former Green MLA and negotiator for the Sartlip Nation. Adam, thanks for filling in and helping us this week.
Thank you for the invite. I look forward to the conversation.
There is no shortage of stuff to talk about, and we are going to begin with the budget update, the first quarter financial results for government. We've been waiting for them. I, online, used a meme from The Shining, where the elevator doors open and the blood comes flying out the elevator to indicate the red ink in this budget. It is there. $11.6 billion deficit up from the budget. The carbon tax elimination blew a $2.8 billion hole. There's structural overspending. The housing market's down, so the property transfer tax is down. The economy's contracting. Unemployment is up. You can go on and on down this list. That is a big number, biggest deficit in history. The debt is the highest in history. Adam, when you see those numbers, we often talk on the show, does anyone care? Does anyone get it? Do they see a record deficit and go in the public like, ooh, that looks bad? Have we reached the point now where those numbers make a difference in kind of voters' minds, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think that my voters, when I had constituents almost a year ago now, which is they did it was something that they paid attention to, and I think that it is definitely a narrative around the BC NDP that I think John Horgan was able to shake for a few years, but that is now starting to reattach itself to this political party that the fiscal management, certainly under David Eby, has been pretty unsustainable. And one of the things that I'm really concerned about and what I'm witnessing with this government is, yes, we've got a big budget deficit, but I'm worried about the impact that that's having on the money that we do have and the efficacy and efficiency of government right now that I'm seeing. There's a lot of chaos inside government. I'm not seeing a lot of leadership, and I'm very concerned about the money that we do have and how that's being spent.
There is, as part of government's management, and you're touching on that, this efficiency. They don't call it a core review, but some sort of sweeping review of government. The ministries are being reorganized. There's jobs that are disappearing. Attrition, the premier said more than 800 members of the civil service are gone as part of this. Jeff, those efficiencies of a $1.5 billion over 3 years during a time when the budget deficit is going to be $35 billion seem like a pretty big headache for government to wear when it's not going to make much of a difference in the overall numbers.
Well, if you want to bring the public along with you in a fight against a deficit, you need to be willing to make sacrifices on your side to show that you're practicing what you preach. Look, on the efficiencies, I think that's a small part of the government's plan to try and restore balance. The bigger part of it, and we saw some movement on it in recent days, is grow the economy, to grow revenues, to create through corporate income higher corporate income taxes, higher personal income taxes, more resource royalty revenues. And you're seeing it through projects like Highland Valley Copper. You're seeing it through C. Lissom's LNG, dozens more projects in the hopper. And the risk to that is that the projects actually have to cross the finish line or the strategy falls apart.
Okay, growing the economy sounds good. It's going to take time, Ali. And I guess I'm wondering about the political pressure on this government right now on deficit, debt, finances, versus some of these investments that are being made that while positive, Jeff listed some of them there, could take years before they even begin construction or show kind of growth to the economy. What kind of position does that government, does it put David Eby in when he keeps emphasizing economic growth, but it kind of seems like long-term growth.
Yeah, it's very interesting because the finance minister, in collaboration with David Eby, has done a fantastic job of building a narrative that they're creating efficiencies within ministries, and we're not seeing that, right? And so this is a long-term growth. Like, that's what you're saying here, is that this is that private sector economy that the opposition side talks about all the time. It's the investment in these major projects so that we can build our economy, not build government. And so I just don't know what the NDP are going to be able to do in order to create this narrative of just wait and see. Your grandchildren will have jobs, but you have to suffer through it for a couple of generations.
There are no numbers from government on really on kind of the level of efficiency that's achieved other than those numbers. Jeff, one of the most popular segments in the history of the show was you and I debating deferral accounting rules. I think we reached like 5 viewers, so that was a pretty good one. Do you want to debate?
No, I don't want to debate that.
Do you want to debate the use of tobacco revenue? The government got an 18-year, $3 billion and change tobacco revenue settlement. The money comes in over 18 years. They booked it all this year. And most of the first quarter financial update was questions to Brenda Bailey and finance officials about how are you booking revenue where we don't have the cash now and using it for services when we don't actually have it. The answer being government borrows the money against itself and pays itself back over 18 years. Anyways, it certainly helped the government. It washed out the carbon tax losses. The budget deficit probably should have been 14 billion. What did you make of the tobacco accounting stuff?
I mean, it was fortunate for government, because without it, it would have been a $14 billion plus a deficit. On whether it's an appropriate way to account, I believe the Auditor General was asked questions on this and said it was an appropriate way to account for the money coming in. So I'll take the Auditor General's view on this over the opposition BC Conservatives.
Although I will say that the Auditor General and government have been locked in a 10-year battle over whether government should be allowed to do this or not. Government's position up until this point has always been the opposite, and now this year they're willing to do it.
Well, it's good they're listening. It's good they're listening.
That's good. Pretty good. Adam, who would have thought cigarette smoke would save the BC first quarter financial results? If I'm Premier Eby and that cabinet, I'd start smoking, because you need to rely on these cigarette companies to be around for 18 years to pump this revenue back into government. I guess just an example of the weird, kind of wild way that the finances of the government seem to be kind of rolling these days.
Well, it's interesting that the difference between it being a $14 billion deficit and $11 billion deficit, or $12 billion, and you frame it as saving the government. We still have a $12 billion deficit that we're dealing with. The cigarette and tobacco sales are a nice distraction. I think a nice distraction for the government, that it took up so much time and space when you were talking with Jeff there about public, it reminded me of the Public Accounts Committee, how we would hear from the Auditor General year after year that BC needs to get its accounting standards in alignment with the rest of the world, and BC was arguing, no, we don't, specifically on this area. I want to reiterate, I'm really concerned about what the impact of all of this is having on the public service as it currently stands right now, because my experience is that a lot of things that should be moving that are not being threatened by the cuts have been ground to a halt, and people are within government are very concerned about their jobs. They're concerned about their future, and the type of efficiency that's being talked about in political rhetoric, I am not seeing it in the way government is functioning in my regular interactions with numerous ministries, and that's very concerning, because we need that money to be working for us.
And plus, you layer on the BCGEU strike and the strike tactics this week to target the mining and kind of approvals and permitting and engineering parts of the natural resource sector, which could impact the government's stated goals there too. Yeah, no, you're right. Adam, I want to stay with you on the BC Conservatives. Right after these quarter numbers came out, released the contract between Premier David Eby and a stand-up comedian from Vancouver, Charlie Demers, who has apparently been hired and retained to write jokes for the Premier's speeches. And it does touch on an issue here of what is discretionary spending, how I think the timing of telling the civil service to do more with less and getting rid of jobs, but not viewing the comedian on retainer in your office that already has, like a dozen people that can write speeches for you as discretionary spending. What did you make of how that landed this week?
Well, I mean, I think that it is an indication of where this Premier's office is at, where they need to hire speechwriters to lighten up the content of the news that they're trying to deliver to British Columbians because of, well, frankly, the leadership that has got us into the situation that we're in right now. Like, nobody could have thought of the fact that when you cancel the carbon tax, that's going to have an impact on the budget, and so you hire comedians or you hire speechwriters who can come in and add some eloquence to what's being articulated. But it's pretty ugly any way you cut it right now in this province. And I think it is an indication of where this Premier's office is at and where their priorities are at, is trying to keep the reputation of the Premier up, even though it seems to be going down.
Ali, what did you think?
It's just so interesting because you can get a job in BC if you're directly hired by David Eby. Like, isn't that just so ironic? And the thing is about this is that meanwhile, the medical wait lists continue to get longer and people just get sicker on them. And then you would think that, like, we talk a lot about, do people care? Do people care if we go into a budget or a deficit as long as things are getting done? And this is the prime example where he's essentially just like stabbed us all in the back, where he's going to hire a comedian and his friend instead of investing this money elsewhere because it's pain on us, right? And so this is where and why people don't trust politicians sometimes. It's because you look at this just contrast of where we should be putting our money and where it's just beneficial for him to potentially get reelected because he's going to throw in some jokes here and there. And I heard some of those jokes at a Burnaby Board of Trade event. They're not that great. Get a refund.
Some of them are okay. I've laughed at a few. The irony, knowing David Eby over the years, is he's a pretty funny guy, Jeff.
Sure is.
I don't think he needs a comedian to write jokes for him. Nonetheless, here we are. What did you think of this?
Well, I think it's unfortunate that we're going after Charlie Demers, who's a respected author, voice actor, and he's a comedian. He's a Juno Award nominated.
We're not going after him. He's collecting public money.
I just got told that we should ask for our money back because he's not funny. So he's got more reputation equity than the angry opposition who's attacking him. Look at every party. Every party has communication staff. The BC Conservatives have 10, which is twice as many people as they have doing research for them. The Greens have
the
one.
The research that
which
found
seems,
this article?
Well,
that's money well spent.
They've got, tell me about if the 10 there's a reason why folks have communication staff, because it's important to engage with constituents. It's important to talk meaningfully at events, big and small, important functions for legislators. I don't think John Rustad writes all of his own speeches. Maybe Rob Botterill does. He's a good guy. But there's a reason why there's communication staff like this, and I think it's petty. And if you want to look at the numbers that have been thrown around, I suppose if you're playing Monopoly at McDonald's, you can win the Chevy Equinox. I think you're more likely to win the hash brown, and that's what 14,000 instead of 600,000, which was the number that was thrown around in one radio interview. Is it's silly. It's a 1 or 2 day story, and
isn't it a judgment thing though? Like, doesn't anyone in the Premier's office look at that and go, if we're going to lay off civil servants who do actual work somewhere else, that probably, if we are literally talking about discretionary expending, is the literal definition of it not a comedian on retainer in the Premier's office? Like, I would think anyone want to, like, I think that's really the problem of the story. Not Charlie Demers seems like a nice guy. It's kind of the judgment call, Adam or Ali, that gets thrown back at the Premier. Like, why don't you follow the same rules that you're making everyone else follow?
I mean, to be fair, somewhat fair to the Premier, I mean, one could also argue that his recent trip to Ottawa is an expense to taxpayers that he shouldn't have done. Like, Why go all the way to Ottawa for things that we could be doing locally? Does it constitute as enough advocacy to the federal government? I mean, there are a million things. The problem is that this is not appropriate when people are suffering because of the crisis developed by the NDP government. If we were in better times, spend all the money you want on things like this. I mean, Christy Clark, I remember an article about a decade ago where she was being criticized because she was spending money on her wardrobe. I mean, sure, but we were also delivering balanced budgets. So, it didn't really sting as much.
True. That's not entirely true. She had budget deficits as well. She had speechwriters. Gordon Campbell had speechwriters. John Horgan had speechwriters. I suppose we could go back to Glenn Clark and Mike Harkart. Everyone had speechwriters.
He's got a whole bunch
because the premier can't, who will do 5 or 6 speeches on a quiet day, can't write his speeches all by himself. So that's why we have them. It's why all premiers, all parties have communication staff. And if we're advocating to scale back communication staff in the premier's office, that's fine, but let's scale them back in the opposition parties as well if they're not. This isn't the time to be spending money on such things.
Well, look, I mean, the different parties have budgets, and they have the ability to spend the money on communication staff or policy staff, and that's up to the political parties to do that. I think that there is a good criticism, or there is a right criticism that we can make about a premier who has continued to build staff, a very robust premier's office, and and a government that has continued to focus on the communications and not on the policy. So this is a real problem that we face with this government in particular, is that they have become very good at communicating. But actually the leadership that we're seeing from this government, the leadership that we're seeing from this premier's office, the leadership that we're seeing across ministries, just in terms of their ability to actually operate without having to hear from the premier's office directly, that's a real problem for British Columbians. We're talking about a $12 billion budget deficit that has nothing to do with the speechwriter, but it has everything to do with the way this government is oriented towards communicating a good message rather than actually governing this province in a sustainable, responsible way.
Let's quickly squeeze in another topic here. John Rustad, a far less funny topic for him because holy moly, does his leadership look like it is on the ropes here. A membership scandal in that party of more than 2,100 fake members apparently signed up in Kelowna, including 2 dead people who posthumously became members of the BC Conservative Party to support John Rustad, it looks like. It's led to caucus meetings, finger-pointing, reviews, reports, leaks, and we're waiting on the leadership review numbers on Monday and whether Rustad survives. Ali, what do you think of this?
The timeline of this is all very unfortunate because we're also in the same media cycle as the results from Bonnie Crombie, where she stepped down at 57%. And so what's going to happen is that now the percentage of what the membership results are for this leadership review will be in comparison to that. It'll be in comparison to overwhelmingly confident votes in favor of keeping their leader. We're talking about he needs now something like 70 to 80%, right? And, one could also argue that in order for him to survive some of this scandal that has been around the leadership review process is also to make sure that he has the confidence of his caucus too. Now, it's not technically necessary for this membership leadership review because it's all just the members, 1 member, 1 vote. But it could be a solid move on John Rustad's part to also ensure that when he announces the results, that it is a backdrop of all of his MLAs that also show confidence in him too. So we will definitely see what happens. But then I should also argue that if it doesn't go his way, that means that they're in a leadership campaign and that we're not talking about potentially 2,000 members disqualified. It could very well be that these candidates would be signing up hopefully 5,000 more members to put in some life into the party too. And then they really have to manage that to make sure that it's not a repeat. But 2,000 members disqualified is like the easiest thing you can do in this, right? That they were invalid and now they're gone. It'd be worse if the 2,000 actually voted.
Yes, I guess it raises questions about the motives behind signing it up and what that means about Rustad's, the strength of his leadership review so far. Jeff, what do you think?
I think it's interesting times for Conservative and Green Party in their leadership reviews and in races. Look, I for one endorse John Rustad to stay on as BC Conservative Party leader. I think he has the charisma, unimpeachable ethics, and calm nature we need from a premier in waiting. Also, what an organizer this guy is. He's shown so much skill at signing up deceased party members. He's all but sewed up the votes in the electoral district of Pearly Gates. So here's the man I want to have leading the Conservatives into the next election.
Every party, every leadership race, every leadership review, we end up talking about members, Adam. In this case, it seems to be at a time when Rustad is dealing with disgruntled members of his caucus, concerns, larger concerns, kind of used as a weapon for people who are unhappy with him, but also a legitimate issue as well. What do you think?
Well, I mean, look, I think that it's important to acknowledge that all three political parties that are, or three of the political parties that are currently in the legislature right now have had some questions around their leadership races. And I think that it's a particularly difficult time for political parties, actually. We remember the chaos around the BC NDP leadership race when David Eby eventually was crowned their leader. And I would just say that the BC Conservatives were basically an accidental official opposition party. And I was sitting next to John Rustad in the legislature and hearing about the chances leading up to that last election. And then the fantastic happened where the fortunes entirely changed in that leadership race. And it certainly wasn't part of the plan, and from at least those early day conversations. So, look, I think that the fact that the BC Conservatives right now are suffering from some structural issues is totally not surprising to me whatsoever. The fact that there's people fighting for their political lives, and I'm not sure what they've done or what actions they've taken, but that's not surprising at all. I think that I think that I was we'll see what happens with the BC Conservatives leadership review. We'll see what happens when the Greens elect a new leader, and hopefully we can restore some confidence in the political organizations in this province.
I appreciate Adam. Thank you for being here. Panel, thanks for being here. We got an extended discussion on the audio podcast. So make sure you subscribe to that. We'll be back next week. We got a live show at UBCM. You can check that out at noon on Friday on CHEK TV and also on YouTube later and on the podcast version as well. The panel will be here on that. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next week on Political Capital. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn how Uber and Mad Canada are reducing impaired driving at uber.com/home soon.